storm hit without warning, a wall of icy wind that tore at tents and whipped snow into impossible spirals. Lyra's flare sputtered and died, its fiery glow swallowed by the howling dark. Through the swirling void she heard it, a distant, rasping cry that could have been human, yet stretched and warped by the gale into something unholy. She staggered forward, her boots sinking into soft drifts, each step a battle against the mountain's wrath. Radio static bit at her ears, and then silence. In the deafening absence of sound, Lyra realized the summit was not merely a cold, barren place, but a threshold to something far more perilous. 48 hours earlier, Lyra recorded the first entry in her journal, the leather pages already stiff with frost. Day 1, base camp. She whispered into the camera, voice tight with determination. Behind her, the jagged peaks of MtKharzun loomed like frozen titans, their weathered faces etched by centuries of wind and snow. The local guides had refused to join her beyond this point, leaving cryptic warnings of vanished hunters and voices carried on the breeze. Lyra pressed on regardless, driven by the promise of redemption and the memory of her brother's disappearance on these very slopes 3 decades ago. Tomas was the first to voice doubt. Camped just below the Sirak wall, he claimed to have seen a figure drifting across the snow, moving soundlessly on feet bare beneath the chill. At first, his teammates laughed it off, mountain fever playing tricks. But the hollow shape had glowed from within, as if lit by a pale internal light. That night, the wind whispered secrets through the tent flaps, murmuring in a voice that seemed at once sorrowful and mocking. Sleep eluded Lyra, who found herself staring at the tent ceiling, fixated on the idea that something ancient and patient watched them with the patience of ice itself. On day 3, their medic, Arya, vanished. One moment she was tending to flexible ropes, her breath misting in the frigid air. The next, she was gone. Search parties combed the icy slopes until dusk, finding only her ice-encrusted glove and a fractured lens from a camera items untouched by footprints or tracks. The team's fear coalesced into a single, desperate thought. They were not alone. In her place lay a single page torn from Arya's journal, the words smeared but legible. It watches. It remembers our sins. Lyra read those words with trembling fingers, wondering what sins they carried up this mountain, and why the mountain itself would hold them guilty. The summit continued to taunt them with its cruel beauty. Crystalline pinnacles pierced bloodless skies, and vast glaciers gleamed under fleeting sunlight. Yet every crystalline ridge hid a potential trap, an unseen crevasse. A fragile cornice ready to collapse. Equipment began vanishing. A pair of goggles one morning, a warming flask the next. At first, they accused one another of pranks, strained nerves twisting camaraderie into suspicion. But the emptiness of those missing items, drifting silently among untouched drifts, suggested a presence far more cunning than any human trickster. Lyra's dreams became battlegrounds, haunted by her brother's silhouette, trailing her across snowfields robed in moonlight. His face, gaunt and drawn, pressed close to hers as he whispered for help. Yet each time she reached, he dissolved into shards of ice that pricked like glass against her palm. She awoke gasping, the tent wall slick with condensation that froze into rivulets. Guilt pooled at her core. She had failed to save him, and now she was leading a new team into the same frozen maelstrom. The only difference was that this time she could not leave empty-handed. By day 5, the mountain had begun to warp their sense of time. Hours stretched into eternity, and the compass spun without purpose, pointing them toward the heart of the storm rather than away. Lyra noticed it first. The daylight faltered, as if muted by an unseen eclipse, and the air grew heavier, each breath tasting of iron and old decay. In the glare of the headlamps at twilight, distorted shapes shifted just beyond the boundary of sight. Every creaking rope and whispering gust carried an echo of distant laughter, an unwelcoming chorus that derailed conversation and drove the team to silence. The caves appeared on day 6, carved by ancient ice and hidden beneath a canopy of overhanging seracs. The entrance yawned like a frozen moor, walls glistening with frost and etched with curious symbols. Lyra hesitated, recalling the cryptic carvings her brother had photographed long ago but had never shared. Inside, the air was still and unnaturally warm, as though the mountain exhaled its breath there, inviting them deeper. Against her better judgment, Lyra led her companions into the heart of the glacier, drawn by a force she could not name, even as her pulse hammered in protest. Candlelight from portable lanterns flickered against the icy walls, illuminating a gallery of bone fragments placed upon a natural altar. The bones were arranged in ominous patterns, as if in ritual, and each piece bore fine, deliberate incisions. Lyra forced herself not to look away, each detail rewriting the story she thought she understood. Symbols carved around the altar matched those from Arya's journal, their angles twisting into unfamiliar constellations. Someone or something had crafted this with deliberate purpose, and now it was theirs to interpret or perish in ignorance. Yara, who had been silent and watchful until now, broke first. Her eyes bore the sheen of overwhelmed panic as she lunged toward the altar, chanting words Lyra did not understand. Her movement was catapulted by some unseen momentum, as though the mountain lent her strength. Teammates scrambled to restrain her, but Yara bucked and twisted, hissing warnings about the echo demanding tribute. Her voice cracked like starved ice underfoot. And when they finally subdued her, she collapsed in tears, whispering that the mountain had shown her the path, and none would escape its design. Fear solidified among the team as a new rule emerged. Trust no one completely. Gear was chained to harnesses. Footsteps were marked with colored ribbons, yet still items vanished. Frozen footprints led to nothing. In the night, the wind grew dense, rattling solid rock as though it sought entry. Lyra heard murmuring voices, soft and pleading, or perhaps mocking, pleading for release from eternal cold. Each plea twisted her gut, rooting doubt in her conviction. What had they stirred in that cave? What had they unleashed upon themselves in the name of discovery? With every passing hour, the air grew thinner and sharper, as though the mountain itself sought to lodge its splinters in their lungs. Thomas, once brash and confident, now stumbled on simple paths, eyes glazed with fatigue. In his delirium, he spat blame at the ice, cursing it for lying to them, for calling them closer, whispering visions of salvation that turned to torment. Lyra held him as he trembled, her own heart pounding with primal fear, aware that madness was a contagion as lethal as the cold. She tightened her grip on her ice axe, the only tool she felt she could truly trust. Desperation drove them on. They pushed past the cave, ascending ever steeper slopes, where the air shimmered with unnatural light. The snow beneath their feet had a rhythm, as though breathing, and each gust carried the echo of distant footsteps, someone pacing just out of sight, tracking their every move. The wind's lament grew clearer, tearing at reason itself. Come home. Join us. Stay. It was a lullaby from beyond the veil, weaving tendrils around their minds. Lyra fought to keep her focus, aware that a single misstep could send her plummeting into a crevasse or into the waiting arms of the unseen. Night fell faster here, and the lanterns revealed horrifying details in the snow. Impressions of hands, frozen mid-reach, and straps of gear half buried as though dragged. The snow held its victims in silent memorial, and each imprint seemed too meticulously placed to be random. Lyra's breath crystallized in the air, and she felt the weight of many gazes upon her, those of climbers long gone, pleading or perhaps jeering. She cursed her ambition, her need for redemption, and every step that led them deeper into this frozen nightmare. On the 7th day, they found the final camp of the original expedition, a tattered banner pinned to an ice wall, its fabric shredded but defiant. Around it lay shattered equipment, remnants of a struggle, and scattered pages from a logbook whose ink had congealed into waxy tears. Lyra pressed a gloved hand to the fabric, as if she could absorb its story through touch. Her vision blurred, and in that moment she saw the past and present collapse. The original climber's joy and terror melded with her own team's suffering. The mountain did not discriminate. It consumed all who dared its heights. The camera was discovered in the aftermath. A frost-cracked GoPro, its lens encased in ice, nestled in a hollow between two rocks. Lyra pried it free and shivered as she pressed play, the screen flickering to life with shaky footage. She watched Elias, the leader of the lost team, pace like a spectre, feverish and hollow-eyed. His words, frantic and disjointed, spoke of a voice that promised unity with the ice in exchange for devotion. Then, in a sudden jerk of the camera, the scene erupted into violence, climbers collapsing, as though felled by an invisible force. The mountain had claimed them, body and soul. Horror clamped around Lyra's heart as Elias turned the camera onto himself, eyes alight with a manic glow. He spoke of becoming one with the mountain, of forging a bond so eternal that neither storm nor time could sever it. He raised an ice axe, and the screen shook as he advanced toward a teammate whose scream was cut short by the lens spinning upward. The video ended with a final glimpse of Elias alone, bathed in moonlight, his silhouette frozen in triumph. Silence reigned, but Lyra's mind thundered with the implications. Elias had not died. He had transcended mortality. The storm's fury peaked that night, gale-force winds battering tents, until ropes snapped and canvas tore. Trapped beneath an overhang of ice, the team huddled together in near darkness, lanterns sputtering feebly. Lyra reviewed the footage again, her fingers trembling, understanding at last. The mountain's power was not limited to its heights. It was an entity that sought converts, shaping the minds and bodies of those who trespassed. Elias had become its wielder, its herald, and now he would come for them, guiding them toward a fate worse than the storm's wrath. Dawn broke with an eerie stillness, the wind reduced to a low moan that seemed to slip through cracks in reality. The team erected makeshift stakes, and prayer flags gleamed from the original camp, desperate symbols of protection against a force that defied all logic. Every prayer felt hollow, every gesture insufficient. Lyra led the treacherous descent, relying on memory and instinct as the path vanished beneath new drifts. The mountains shifted underfoot, as though alive, and each step downward felt like wading through a living labyrinth. Hope flickered when they glimpsed the base camp tents far below, a promise of warmth and rescue. Yet as they drew nearer, the silhouettes of their companions grew gaunt, as though carved from ice. Lyra's own limbs threatened to freeze solid, but she pressed on, driven by the need to survive and preserve the story. With every breath, her lungs burned with cold, and every heartbeat echoed Elias's final words. "Stay. Become one." The mountain's voice followed, slipping into her mind like the wind around a crevice. It was Yara who slipped first, her foot catching on a hidden crevasse that yawned beneath the fresh snow. She vanished with a single cry that echoed like a drill into Lyra's chest. Reaching the edge, Lyra peered into the chasm, its depths obscured by swirling mist. There was no sign of struggle, only the faintest imprint where Yara's gear had been. Lyra pressed her palm to the cold rock, willing herself not to succumb to despair. She wrapped the rope around her belt, descending slowly, driven by a promise she couldn't quite articulate. Halfway down, she found Yara clinging to a narrow ledge, frost-crusted and trembling. Lyra reached for her, anchoring the rope with one hand as she steadied her footing against the slick wall. Yara's eyes met hers, wide with terror and relief, and for a moment they shared the same breath of humanity beneath the cloud of madness. But when Lyra hauled her upward, she noticed the unnatural calm in Yara's stare, the way her lips moved as if reciting words unheard. The pact had been offered. Perhaps she had accepted. By midday, Lyra emerged from the chasm, bruised and hollow, but bearing Yara across her shoulders. The remaining members of the team stared with awe and disbelief as she approached. No cheers greeted her, only the hush of snow settling in silent tribute. Lyra lowered Yara gently, and the two women locked eyes, each seeing the other's terror mirrored. It was then that the static crackle of the radio cut through the silence, a voice on the frequency chanting a single phrase. "The echo demands its due." Panic surged as the team realized their radios had fallen silent for hours, shielded by some unseen interference. Now, that interference was gone, replaced by a singular, resonant tone that seemed to originate from the heart of the mountain itself. The wind carried the chant, folding it into the howling gale as though amplifying a terrible hymn. Lyra felt her resolve fracture under the weight of its melody. She pressed her hands to her ears, willing the sound to stop, but it only grew louder, promising that no mortal ear could withstand its truth. The descent resumed with grim determination, each step taken in near silence. Equipment straps groaned as the cold tightened its grip on metal and flesh alike. Lyra shepherded her team forward, drawing on reserves of willpower she never knew she possessed. Memories of her brother's laughter, of sunny peaks and triumphant summits, flickered in her mind, a warmth she had almost forgotten. Those memories became her anchor, guiding her through the labyrinth of ice toward a hope that might yet be salvation. As they neared the final ridge, the mountain revealed its ultimate deception. A narrow ledge, built from an accumulation of wind-blown snow, overhanging a drop that vanished into storm-blown oblivion. The path they trusted had been an illusion, a siren's trap crafted by the mountain's sentience. Without warning, the ridge gave way beneath Lyra's foot, sending her sliding toward the abyss. She caught herself on her ice axe, heart hammering, eyes wide as she realized the mountain was testing her resolve, seeking any excuse to reclaim them. Lyra found herself dangling above the void, her entire body burning with cold and adrenaline. Below, the wind roared, urging her to let go. She shut her eyes, recalling her brother's voice, telling her to keep faith, to hold on. Summoning every ounce of strength, she hauled herself back onto solid ground, hands numb and muscles trembling. Yara and Thomas scrambled to her side, offering ropes and whispered prayers. For a fleeting moment, they were united by a simple truth. Those who surrendered to the mountain perished, but those who resisted might yet survive. The wind subsided as they reached the base of the ridge, almost as though the mountain had grown bored of its test. The final stretch lay before them, a gentle slope that led back to camp. Yet each step was haunted by the memory of the trial, the whip of wind, and the laughter that echoed from the chasm. Lyra realized that victory would not come with a triumphant return, but with a promise freely given. She would share their story, bear witness to the mountain's hunger, and warn future climbers of the price of conquest. Camp came into view at last. Tents battered but standing, the guides nowhere in sight. A lantern's flicker danced in the window of the main tent, a beacon of fragile hope. Lyra staggered forward, supported by Thomas and Yara, hearts heavy with exhaustion and relief. The snow beneath her boots felt softer here, as though the mountain had released its hold on them at the very edge of its domain. She inhaled the scent of melting wax and campfire, a reminder of warmth and mortal life. Inside the tent, Lyra found the GoPro perched on a tabletop, icicles dripping from its edges. She greeted her team, their faces gaunt but alive, and placed the camera between them. Then, in the flickering lantern glow, she pressed play. Their eyes widened as the footage streamed past, the violence subdued but unmistakable in its implication. Elias's voice echoed through the tent, a ghostly command that transcended time. They watched in silence, the screen illuminating their haunted reflections, each understanding that the mountain's tale demanded to be told. Night crept over base camp, and the wind carried only gentle sighs, as though in mourning. Lyra recorded her final entry. The mountain doesn't want to be conquered. It wants to be remembered. It wants witnesses. Her voice wavered, but held steady, as she described Elias's transformation and the ritual altar they had uncovered. She spoke of Yara's ordeal and the chasm's test, her words weaving together the fractured narrative into a coherent warning. This video would be her legacy and their cautionary tale. With dawn's first light, the team began their descent off the mountain entirely. Guides awaited them at a lower camp, eyes wide with a mixture of awe and dread. No one spoke of triumph. Their expressions were solemn, aware that they carried more than frostbitten limbs and frostbite scars. They bore a testimony of the living mountain, of its hunger and its power to reshape the minds of those who trespassed. Lyra clasped the GoPro to her chest like an altar, vowing to share its lesson with the world. In the months that followed, Lyra's footage and journal entries became a record of the inexplicable. Researchers debated the mountain's sentience. Skeptics dismissed it as hallucinations induced by altitude. But survivors, those who stood at the edge of the chasm and returned, spoke of the whispering wind, the ritual bones, and the manic gaze in the frozen footage. They described a presence older than any human memory, a cold intelligence that judged trespassers and claimed souls to feed its eternal vigil. Lyra found herself haunted by fragments of that final night. The lantern's glow, the distant chant, and her brother's pleading face emerging from the ice. She returned to base camp only once, planting a weather-beaten plaque at the site, engraved with a simple warning. Here lie stories, not bodies. Do not disturb their rest. The mountain watched her as she left, its peaks gleaming with silent approval, or perhaps silent indifference. She could not tell which. Her recordings premiered at a small alpine conference where the lights in the auditorium dimmed and the screen came to life. Viewers watched in rapt silence as the wind-blasted slopes and ritual cave came into focus. When the final frame faded to black, a hush fell over the crowd, broken only by the crackling of the projector. Lyra stood before them, her voice steady, as she shared the lessons of obsession and respect. She urged climbers everywhere to reconsider the thin line between conquest and damnation. Late that night, alone in her apartment, Lyra reviewed the GoPro footage one last time. Across the frozen screen, Elias's hollow eyes seemed to follow her, unnervingly vivid despite the ice's distortion. He raised his axe and spoke the final words. "Become one." The chill of that command seeped through her bones, reminding her that the mountain's reach extended beyond physical heights. It dwelled in memory, in recorded whispers, in the restless dreams of those who listened too closely. She sent copies of the footage to every climbing guild and rescue team she could reach, each tape sealed with a personal note. "Heed these warnings, the mountain is alive." Responses poured in, some praising her courage, others questioning her sanity. But all agreed on one point. MtKharzun had claimed more than those who vanished. It claimed belief in human dominion, replacing it with something far older and more humbling. In time, the mountain became a legend whispered around base camps, its slopes avoided by the wise and mocked by the foolhardy. Yet every now and then, a message would arrive, a recorded plea for a permit, a desperate request to join an expedition. Lyra replied only once, declining with regret. She knew the mountain did not care for regret, but perhaps it respected boundaries. Some stories, she believed, must remain buried in ice. Winter settled once more over MtKharzun, its peaks glittering under indifferent stars. Beneath the surface, the cavern still waited, bones arranged in silent ceremony, the wind murmuring its ancient refrain. Elias's spirit lingered there, bound to the ice, neither dead nor alive, a sentinel of the mountain's will. Travelers spoke of flickering lights in the swirling snow, of distant voices urging them closer. Few dared to investigate, for no one wished to face the echo's price. And so the mountain endures, its story carved into ice and memory. Lyra's final message echoes beneath every gust. The mountain doesn't want to be conquered. It wants witnesses. As long as those words survive, MtKharzun will remain more than frozen peaks. It will be a living testament to humanity's fragile arrogance, a reminder that some heights are best left unclimbed and some echoes left unanswered.